Today we are going to go through 1.3 vocab, and it's all about angles. Make sure you have your vocabulary sheet out and are writing down the notes and drawing the pictures. The first one we're going to start with is right angle. A right angle is any angle measure that is exactly 90 degrees. So we talked about this in 1.2 with perpendicular. Okay, so when we have a perpendicular line, we have a right angle or we have 90 degrees. And you'll see here that we have a 90-degree angle like we did with perpendicular. Okay, you will see this little corner marking for all right angles. Typically, they don't put the 90 degrees there, so you're going to have to know that that box represents 90 degrees. An acute angle is any angle that's less than 90 degrees. I think most of us remember that. Okay, and here I just have the less than 90 to remind you, but if you would rather put like 40 degrees or 50 degrees as an example, that is fine. An obtuse angle is an angle measure that's greater than 90 degrees, but less than 180 degrees. So they're the bigger ones. So here I have the greater than 90 degrees, okay, but if you want to put like 120 or 130 or something, that's more helpful, you can do that. So far we have right angle is 90, acute is less than 90, and obtuse is greater than 90. Next we have supplementary angles. We're also going to talk about complementary angles as well. They are easily confused by people, okay, because supplementary angles are two angles whose measures add up to 180 degrees. They tend to make a straight angle, okay, or 100 degrees or 180 degrees, which is a straight line. Okay, so here, my example, I have 110 and 70, and those two together add up to 180 degrees. If I'm going too fast, make sure you're pausing the video. Complementary angles are angle measures that add up to 90 degrees. So supplementary, they add up to 180 degrees. Complementary is 90 degrees. Okay, so here, as my example, 50 and 40, okay, those two together would add up to 90 degrees. They are complementary angles. Next, I have vertical angles. Vertical angles come up a ton. Okay, especially in chapter 2, coming up next unit, we have almost like a full section about vertical and linear pair angles, which we will talk about here in a second. Okay, so vertical angles come up a ton, so this is an important one to remember. Vertical angles are angles that they share a common vertex, but are opposite each other and are equal in measure. Okay, so that's kind of a confusing definition. I think the picture will help make it a little easier. So here we have some vertical angles. Angle 1 and angle 3 are vertical angles. Not only are they vertical angles, but they are congruent or equal in measure. Okay, so if angle 1 was 120 degrees, angle 3 would also be 120 degrees. Same goes with angle 4 and angle 2. They are also a set of vertical angles, which means they are also congruent. Okay, so if angle 4 is 60 degrees, then so is angle 2. Okay, so they are equal or congruent. So 4 and 2 and 1 and 3 are the set of vertical angles. Okay, take a minute, okay, think about it, write it down. Okay, if you need to write down 120 for 1 and 3 and 60 for 4 and 2, okay, you can do that as well. Linear pair of angles is one that all of my geometry students struggle with. Okay, it typically shows up on every single test from here on out. Okay, and people continuously get it wrong, so maybe star it or something so that you remember to look back on it. Linear pair of angles are two angles that share the same vertex. Now, when we talk about a linear pair of angles, okay, we are talking about typically when they form a straight line or 180 degrees. If you look at the definition of linear, it says line in it, right there in the definition. Okay, so here we have 45 degrees and 135 degrees. Together, they are a linear pair of angles. I'm going to go back to the vertical angle picture because we also have some linear pairs here. If I'm looking at angle 1 and angle 2, these two form a straight line. They are also called a linear pair. Now they are not congruent, as we know, right? We said angle 1 was 120 and angle 2 was 60. Together though, 120 plus 60, they form 180 degrees. Right? Angle 1 is also a linear pair with angle 4. Okay, because right, 1 was 120 degrees, 4 was 60 degrees. Together they form 180 degrees, or a linear pair. Next, or last, we have congruent angles. Okay, congruent angles are angles that have the same measurement. So our vertical angles, they were congruent angles, right? I talked about them being congruent or equal. Okay, here I have kind of two different sets of congruent angles here. Sometimes they will be labeled with degrees, like 48 degrees and 48 degrees, to show they're congruent, or they will be labeled with little hash marks here, okay, as shown. Okay, so these two angles would be congruent to each other. This third angle off to the left wouldn't necessarily be congruent to the other two. Yeah, it looks like they could all three be equal, but since it doesn't state that, we can't assume. We can only assume that these two off to the right are congruent to each other.